It's time to explore wrestling's past and potential future with your weekly dose of a segment we call What If? Only found here on the WWE Podcast.
All right, welcome to a What If segment for the week, and we've got Anthony DeMarco back with us for the first time in a couple of weeks. My own fault with my own family sleep issues, but we are back with a brand new, fresh episode this week, and we are going to be talking about something very recent, something that could have happened, something that still could, I guess, happen if they transition the character, but we're going to talk this week about what if Brock Lesnar returned as his former self, meaning if he looked the same and if his personality wasn't altered the way it is now with his babyface character. Anthony, welcome back. Really looking forward to getting into this one.
Yeah, man, I think it's something worth talking about because I think you've brought up on your own shows about how Brock Lesnar has been just so different and almost to a fault at times as opposed to the guy that we became accustomed to between 2012 and 2020. And I just keep thinking, like, how would it have gone had he just shown up with the same crew cut, clean shaven, in the track pants and the cutoff tee that we became accustomed to during those 8 years? And I guess I'll pitch it to you to start. Had Brock come out at SummerSlam 2020 to confront Roman Reigns as he did, do you think it would have felt the same?
Yeah, I mean, I know that people see this is where the subjectivity comes into it. A lot of people I've talked to love the hair. I actually do not like the hair. I think that I think his beard is cool. Like, I'm cool if he wants to grow a beard. That's, by all means. But the whole ponytail at his age, I know that Brock can be Brock and Brock can do whatever the hell he wants, and he can. But I'm not a fan of it. Again, that's very subjective. But I think if he came out and his cutoff and his even like a normal pair of jeans or the track pants. To me, that would have felt more like Brock Lesnar. To me, this was like it was a Brock Lesnar version that I wasn't really quite ready for, and I think it would have felt a little bit different. And at the time, I was willing to give it a chance. So there's that kind of element of, okay, there's an evolution of Brock happening here. Let's see what happens. I actually would have enjoyed it a little bit more had it been, personally, Brock Lesnar as the Brock Lesnar we knew him, because it was such a good look and it worked for, essentially his entire career. I didn't see a need to change the physical appearance of himself, and just for the sake of evolution of Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar is kind of an interesting character where I don't think he needs to evolve. And I say that all the time about people that, that's how you extend your career, is evolving, and that's how you stay relevant. But Brock Lesnar, he has found a formula that never seems to get old, and that is the legitimate credentialed badass that comes out, the clean-cut kind of just badass NCAA champion, UFC heavyweight champion. I mean, you name it, Brock has won it, and just come out and do his Brock Lesnar thing. And at least, again, if we're just talking about SummerSlam this year, I personally would have enjoyed it a little bit more. I know that he's going for the just walked off the farm look. I get that. And he certainly this past week, and we'll be able to get into that too, where he came out in like a butcher's apron and played nice with Sami Zayn until, of course, Paul Heyman triggered something inside of him. But what do you think?
Well, you are right. I think the thing that sparked my thought on this topic was when he came out in like the overalls, like he had just finished gutting a moose or something. And look, I've kind of got a kick out of it. Obviously, I'm Canadian, so all the references to Saskatchewan have made me laugh. And even as a fellow Canadian, people who are from Saskatchewan are very unique. Like, one of my best friends growing up moved out to Saskatchewan, and 12 years later, he's still out there. And there is a distinct personality trait that people from Saskatchewan have that other Canadians don't. So I've gotten a kick out of that. But I do think that they may have swung a bit too far into making this Brock Lesnar different than the classic one. And I think you and I are both in lockstep that contrary to much opinion, we love Brock Lesnar, even as the old version of himself, even if he was part-time. I think you've said it before. I know I've said it. One thing that makes Brock Lesnar is the fact that he does things his way, on his terms. He shows up when he wants. Like, in some weird way, I felt like he made the championship, whether that be the Universal or WWE, feel more important when he had it, and he only would show up when he deemed it necessary, because it made the world title feel special, especially when he had that run on Monday Night Raw with the Universal title for what was it, 18 months or so before he ultimately dropped it to Roman, I believe, at SummerSlam in 2018. Like, Brock made it feel special in his own way, and in an untraditional way, a unique way. So, but at the same time, I respect what they're trying to do with him now. You know, we've heard for years that people were tired of the same old Brock Lesnar act, that it was stale. I personally think a lot of people were just saying that to say it, and then when he did come back, they would pop like little girls, like I do when he comes back. So while I respect what they're doing, and they're showing a new side of Brock, and I think for Brock himself, he is proving to everyone that, hey, if I really want to, I can have a character. I can be funny. I can be a bit comical and personable. I don't need a mouthpiece. I'm passable on the mic. But I still do think there's something to be said about how cool and original and how classic the original Brock Lesnar gimmick is.
Yeah, the original Brock Lesnar doesn't get old. I think they could have done this whole kind of alter personality, this more laid back and, as you said, a bit comedic side of him without changing the look. Now, maybe Brock insisted on it, and like we just said, art imitates life here. This isn't just conjecture. This is real. Like, Brock does call the shots. Seriously. I mean, like, this is not just a talent doing what management says. I truly believe this was something that Brock Lesnar decided that he wanted to do instead of coming back and being the same guy. I think he wanted to just bring the look that he literally is sitting at his house with. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And Vince is like, well, all right. I mean, like, he calls the shots. Let's be clear. Brock doesn't need to be here. Brock doesn't need the money. Brock is extremely secure. I don't have access to his bank accounts, but I have the feeling that Brock Lesnar is doing just fine when it comes to money. So I don't think that it's a situation where WWE, or rather he needs WWE, but WWE needed him. So that tells you where the leverage of this agreement lies. And so I think it was Brock who decided to change up his look. I really believe that. And to me, it's not, I don't like it. I don't hate it. I'm not going to rant about it. It's not my taste. I've now had enough of a sample to go, it doesn't work for me. Every time I see him come out in like the cowboy boots or the butcher's apron this week, and he still has the ponytail or the plaid shirt, like, I don't know. I don't hate it. It's just I prefer the original much more over his kind of evolved look. And again, he could still maintain this kind of comedic side with the more traditional look, I think. And I don't know if he knows that. I don't know if he is trying to feel out what people think, or if he literally does not give a damn. He probably does not care, which makes it even more funny that he's just like, yeah, I don't care. I know I could beat everyone's ass in here. I've got more money than everyone in here combined. I mean, and on and on and on. And he just does what he does. And that's what makes Brock so hilarious, is that this is not just pro wrestling, in a fantasy environment. This is actually, we're seeing Brock Lesnar just be himself, which works way more often than not. And I think no script for Brock works. I don't think they've really given him a script. You could see it on TV. Giving Brock a script, when Brock tries to remember lines, Brock doesn't do well. So they just say, hey, Brock, here's where we want to go. Do it. You can tell that's what's happening here. And, I'm fine with it, but I do wonder what now is going to happen with Brock, given the trigger that Paul Heyman seemed to set off this past week when he introduced Brock Lesnar as the reigning, defending, undisputed, like he went on his whole spiel. That snapped something in Brock, and I do wonder if that is going to bring him back to the more of original Brock Lesnar, or if we're just going to see this version of Brock until he goes away again.
Well, I think that is the ultimate payoff, and I think that what we're learning here is that as much as people don't want to admit it, and the keyboard warriors want to say, like, oh, it's stale, no one wants to see that, everyone loves Brock and Paul together. Everybody likes when those two are together. They are arguably the most dynamic wrestler-manager duo in the history of professional wrestling. Like, obviously, you've been watching longer than me, but off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone better, a better duo in that respect. And for all those years, people said, oh, Paul Heyman, or Brock needs Paul Heyman. He would be nothing without Paul Heyman. So I do agree with you that I much rather the classic Brock and the track pants, all that, But I am rather happy in some way that Brock is doing what he's doing so that he could at least prove the doubters and the haters that he can, if he wants to, be his own character. And while you don't like this as much as the classic Brock character, like myself, do you feel as though, A, are you happy that he's done this to silence the haters? And B, do you think he's done a passable job as his own character?
Yeah, I think he did it to silence haters, but I think it is passable, and I understand the certain charm of this character. I get it. There is a certain charm to it. If I try to like it, I can, because Brock Lesnar is such a once in a lifetime athlete and once in a lifetime performer that any version of Brock, I mean, I would essentially be okay with. And this version of Brock, again, it's not my favorite, but could I force myself to eventually like it if there's not going to be a snap back to his original? Yeah, I mean, I could. I'd rather not have to force myself and just have it happen naturally, but I really don't think actually we're going to see a more traditional Brock. I think this is Brock Lesnar of 2021 into 2022, and I don't think this look is going anywhere. Now, he may back off of the butcher aprons and things like that. He may tone it down a little bit in terms of his just outrageous outfits he's coming out. I mean, are we really supposed to believe that he sat on a plane in a butcher's apron? Maybe. I mean, as I say it, now that it's Brock Lesnar, I mean, he probably wouldn't care. Someone gave him a look, he'd say, what are you looking at, punk? You could just imagine what Brock Lesnar's like in real life. And what we see is kind of what we get. But again, I think there is a certain charm to it. So I think he is silencing the haters. But the thing is, too, as much as we talk about this look, as much as we talk about his personality, I think that really it comes down to his in-ring, which has not changed. His in-ring has not changed. Yes, he lost to Roman at SummerSlam, albeit controversial methods with the title belt to the face. But in-ring, he still is the beast. He still looks generally the way he has looked over the last 10+ years. Not exactly, but he's pretty damn close and pretty damn good for his age, considering he's not in the UFC. He has no reason to train. He's just essentially this is just like the equilibrium Brock Lesnar. This isn't even Brock Lesnar really trying, and that's what's even scarier. So when it comes to in-ring, he hasn't seemingly lost a step. That's, to me, the most important thing. And that he's, like you said, the one good thing, hey, this is a much more relaxed Brock Lesnar. He's showing more depth of his character. That's good. He's not given a script. You don't give Brock a script. And it's also, I think, kind of liberating for Brock to get on the mic and get over the fear of it. I really don't believe Brock Lesnar likes being on the microphone. And he's said that many times. So, yeah, I would say that this is a way to silence his haters.
Do you feel like, for the most part, he's been accepted with open arms in this new babyface character?
I'd say generally yes. I wouldn't say overwhelmingly. I mean, when you listen to the reaction he got on SmackDown in that segment with Sami Zayn, and he's trying to be funny, it wasn't cringeworthy. It wasn't like, oh my God, this is secondhand embarrassment. It wasn't that level, but the crowd didn't kind of know what to do. They were almost silent at part of his jokes that I'm sure in his head sounded funnier coming from a guy like him. And the crowd generally was kind of like, oh, haha. Like, I mean, they went along with it. They didn't boo him. But I think that version of Brock, where he was being buddy-buddy with Sammy, talking about going hunting and fishing and all this stuff, I think it went maybe a little bit too long, where people are like, all right, this is a weird Brock Lesnar. Can we just see him beat somebody's ass? And thank God for Paul Heyman in that segment, because otherwise, if they had just walked off arm in arm together, this may be a different conversation. That would have been very, very weird. That's not the Brock Lesnar people pay to see. That's not the Brock Lesnar WWE should pay to be on TV. And I was really concerned because it went on very long, and I think that it would have, and you heard the crowd just kind of silence about it and not reacting too strongly, because they didn't want to boo it because it's Brock Lesnar, but they also didn't know what to do, I think. So, yeah.
And the other thing that I think is, like, I assume that they were always going to bring him back as a babyface to combat Roman Reigns, but had they brought him back in the classic Brock form, Do you think that it would have had the same feel and it would have been as easy for us to get behind him as a babyface? And not for us directly and in a vacuum, because you love Brock Lesnar, I love Brock Lesnar. I think he's one of the best workers of all time, and guys like John Cena and Steve Austin have all said that. But do you think that the general fan would have had a harder time accepting that classic version of Brock Lesnar as a babyface?
I don't think so, because if he had come back as the classic Brock Lesnar, that was something we've all seen. Unless you're brand new to wrestling, it's not something that would have been something no one's ever seen before. We've all known that this is normally what Brock Lesnar does, says, and looks like. Now, my philosophy is that if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I don't think that character of Brock Lesnar was broke. Yes, he could have talked more on the microphone. Paul Heyman did 99% of the talking, while many nights that he came to Raw with Brock Lesnar when he was Universal Champion on the 400+ day run, that he just stood there, did his little bounce, and got paid like, $500,000 just to fly in, stand there while Paul Heyman does the talking. Brock Lesnar stands there and makes mean faces, and then he gets on a plane and goes back home. I mean, good for Brock. To be able to be that caliber of an athlete and get paid to do essentially nothing most of the time, unless it's a pay-per-view, good for him. But I think certainly when you look at Brock Lesnar and the fact that he could have evolved more as a babyface, this is what we're seeing. I just think it's a little bit too far. It's again, not my favorite iteration of Brock Lesnar. I understand it from that perspective of wanting to show a different side of him. But again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. The formula that we've seen for a decade and a half, since 2002, essentially, my God, 20 years. Holy crap. So 20 years that we've seen Brock Lesnar in. Generally, this has been the Brock we've seen. It just works. And no matter how many times we see it, people pay to see, if you're waiting for Brock Lesnar to show up, you pay to see him just cause mayhem and destruction. You don't pay to see him come in and crack jokes. I mean, I really don't believe that. So I would say, no, they probably should have kept him, and people would have been more receptive to that version of Brock, the traditional version of Brock, the one that we know, we love, and we hadn't seen for 18 months. And maybe he'll snap back to that. We saw a little bit of that last week with Paul Heyman doing something and triggering something inside of him. But that, to me, it wasn't broke. It may have been a little overplayed, and they could have added wrinkles, but this is almost like a bit of a facelift.
Why do you think so many people rejected Brock over the last, let's say, 10 years that he's been back in WWE, or 9.5 since he returned in 2012? Because even at his peak, when he was Universal Champion, defeating Kofi Kingston, all that, people just love to crap all over Brock Lesnar. I never saw it. He's long been one of my favorite characters in WWE, especially in this new generation where he's kind of like a bit of nostalgia from what it was like back in the Ruthless Aggression era, and still a great in-ring worker. Why, in your opinion, do you think so many people refuse to acknowledge Brock Lesnar for how good of a worker and character he's been for the last 2 decades?
Well, I think a lot of it was that he was champion, at least in the recent memory, he was Universal Champion for so long, and I think a lot of people resented the fact that he was not there. That he was not there every week, maybe there once a month, defended it on an occasional basis, and that's why they turned him into a heel, because I don't think they believed a lot of people would cheer somebody like that, at least how often he defended it, how often he was there. But that's only because the current generation of fans have been educated to believe that a champion should be there every week. They should defend it all the time to anybody. I would completely disagree with that and say that it's the respect of the championship that would take utmost importance. And it's not about just defending it against anybody, because then you're saying anybody is qualified for this championship, which is, again, it disrespects the championship itself. I mean, there's so many things wrong when a champion the babyface champion declares every time that they're going to defend it against any and all comers. I know what they're doing, that they're trying to take away any potential cowardice that person has, but it also takes a lot of intelligence away from that person, that they're going to defend it against anybody. This championship that we're supposed to believe they scratched, clawed, bled, and cried over to get, they're going to defend it against anybody. Well, no, that should not be the case. And so I think that there was a resentment with Brock not being there. I understood it, and I think him not appearing every week made it more special when he did appear. We're seeing that now a little bit with Roman Reigns. When he's not there, I enjoy it. Not that I don't enjoy Roman Reigns, but I think it adds more importance to when he does show up. And I don't think champions need to show up every single week. Now, WWE needs star power, so I don't think they're going to use this as a template moving forward to say, champions don't need to be there every week. The Raw Tag Team Champions stay home this week, and the Intercontinental Champion. No. They're not going to do that. But, in the old days with the NWA and things, the NWA champion would would travel from territory to territory, and it wasn't somebody you saw very often. And the championship was not defended that often. And I think people, at least how we're educated today, resented Brock for that. Bringing it back to Brock with the Universal Championship, that was a big part of it. They got sick of it because it was very formulaic when he would come into the ring with Paul Heyman and he didn't do much. You knew he wasn't going to have a match, and he'd probably be gone for the next 4 weeks until the pay-per-view. And it went on and on and on for nearly 500 days. So I think that, in terms of just the recent sample size anyway, is a big reason why people started to, quote, crap on Brock Lesnar is because of that.
It's so crazy because people talk about, Mount Rushmore's top 10s, top 5, however you want to rank it. And it's rare that Brock ever kind of enters the mix and enters the equation for one of these lists. And for me, when I really think about it, the longevity, the impact on the industry, his accomplishments, I find it really cool. And I think he's the only guy who can say this, at least in the last 2 or 3 decades. Brock Lesnar has only ever held the world championships in WWE. He's never had the Intercontinental. He's never had the U.S. tag team, none of that. And in some way, obviously you can point to, guys like HBK and Triple H and Steve Austin and all members of the Shield, they're Grand Slam champions. They've won every gold that has been made available to them. But then you think about Brock and you say, isn't it kind of badass that he's only ever put in time for the world titles? He never wasted his time on the U.S. Championship or the IC title in the early years. He debuted in April, and in August he was winning the Undisputed Championship. He was gone for, 8 years? He came back. He instantly went after the World Championship after he defeated, Triple H and Undertaker and all that. He's the guy that ended Taker's streak. So when I think about all these things, he is kind of a unicorn, and in a way, you could almost justify him being one of the most dominant characters and wrestlers and one of the biggest impacts on the industry of all time. Again, him coming back from UFC, where he was a legitimate world heavyweight champion in real mixed martial arts, no other wrestler can say that in the history of the industry. And then you couple that with ending Taker's streak and only ever having time for world titles, man, oh man, the more I think about it, how could you not have Brock on a serious consideration list for any top 5 or Mount Rushmore?
That's a hell of a question. I think one of the reasons, again, maybe in terms of how a lot of fans look at their Mount Rushmore, is I think it's consistency in being there. And again, while I just said I don't have any problem with him not being there, I think in the minds of most fans, they had a problem and did have a problem and continue to have a problem that Brock is not there as much as they'd like him to be. He had the big run, of course, his initial run from 02 to 04 before he left. We all know the story of the Minnesota Vikings, all that. Then he returned after becoming UFC champion. In really, most people didn't give him a shot at that sport, and he climbed to the top of the mountain and won the heavyweight championship in UFC. He was the NCAA champion. He could have competed at the Olympic level had he actually put his mind to it. Now, it's all just kind of assumptive that he would have won a gold medal, but I think he would have been in contention. I think that's a fair assumption. He ascended to the top of the World Wrestling Federation, World Wrestling Entertainment, and he won the top championship there. And you're right, he never competed for any of those mid-tier belts because he didn't have to. And at Brock's level, with the once-in-a-lifetime athlete that he is, I think that makes perfect sense. I don't think Brock would be categorized in those quote unquote lesser championships. Now, I'm all about respecting championships, and Brock Lesnar is a once in a lifetime athlete, but I believe Brock Lesnar, and I hate to say this, but he's kind of above those belts. I mean, I can say that with a once in a lifetime athlete like Brock Lesnar. He should not have competed for those. You could make an argument that he he would have helped his career. I don't think so. I really don't, because look where he ended in the WWE. He ended at the top of the mountain, and he continues every time when he comes back to be at the top of the mountain. And I don't think he ends up on a lot of people's Hall of Fame lists, or rather Mount Rushmores, because the inconsistency of him being there, the in and out. He's here 1 week, he's gone for 5 weeks. He at this point too, he's aged. He's not going to be the future. He's going to have a championship match here and a championship match there. I don't think he's going to be the one to end Roman's streak too either. But to me, it's inconsistency, and I also think that his lack of really his ability to cut an A+ promo also hurt him. As great as he is, and as just magnetic as he is, and just once in a lifetime, he did lack the ability to cut that just emotional promo that would pull you in. He never really did. Now, he had body language that would do it, but there's differences in that and words. He had Paul Heyman, no doubt, but there's a difference in having somebody speak for you and you speaking for yourself. So I think maybe that's also another contributing factor, is he never really seemingly could cut that A+ promo that maybe if he did and had the ability would have made him a more well-rounded performer.
When all is said and done, where do you ultimately think he'll fall on, let's say, the hierarchy of the legends of the wrestling industry? Like, do you think he's up there with like the Austins, Rocks, Hogans, and Cenas of the world? Do you think he's kind of right under with like the HBKs and the Triple H's? Like, where do you think he'll ultimately fall when all is said and done?
I think he's already in the top 5. I mean, I think to me he's just outside of my Mount Rushmore. And it's because of the lack of ability of an A+ promo and the inconsistency. There is something to be said for that. Because if you're not there on a semi-regular basis, and then you go away for a year and a half and you come back and then you're gone for another, like, that does wear on the minds of fans, that they know you're not going to be around very long. Therefore, they're not going to really emotionally invest super hard into your character, because they know your schedule. They know at this point you're not really invested in WWE. You're kind of here for the paycheck, but they still find you entertaining. It's a weird dynamic. So with all that kind of wrapped up, to me, he falls outside of the Mount Rushmore for me. He's never really been in the Mount Rushmore. You can make an argument, but I think when you compare to like Rock, Austin, Taker, Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, like you look at all these individuals that had a lasting impact, at least on a consistent, like, long streak basis, and they were all excellent promos. That to me kind of knocks Brock down into that just underneath Mount Rushmore for me. That's not to say he's not. Of course, he's a Hall of Famer, and he should be in most people's top 5, top 10 at the bare minimum, especially in-ring performance, which is really also what makes Brock an ultimate performer, is that he not only can, of course, speak to you in body language, but in the ring, his presence is just second to none. He can compete with the best of the best. And that also is something. There's something to be said for that. So yeah, to me, he's right outside of the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I do think people undervalue just how good he is in the ring. That is one thing that people really undersell, because they see like the vast majority of his matches over the last 9 years or so and say, oh, he can't work. And it's like, no, he can. He could probably work with the best of them. And I think that he's arguably the best seller in the industry right now. But it's just because he doesn't have to work. He doesn't want to work. And to your point, that's what makes the character so damn badass, in my opinion. It makes it so unique, and ultimately it makes it authentic. You can make the case that Brock Lesnar is the most realistic and, well, not so much relatable, because I'm not 6'3", 290 pounds, but he does seem just like you said, like that is him. Like that is exactly who Brock Lesnar is. He's not playing Brock Lesnar. He's just being Brock Lesnar, because that is truly how he is in real life. And I think that, enough people have spoken how good he is in the ring. We saw it in the early 2000s, and even some matches even more recently. Like, he is a very good worker. It's just that the character doesn't kind of fit a guy who's going to go for like a 25-minute marathon match. And I guess just top to bottom, he's a guy that is so original, is so authentic, and someone that I do think when all is said and done, a lot of people and fans will look back and think that they took for granted.
That's always the case in any form of life. We're always going to look back and be like, oh man, I wish he had one more match. I mean, people miss the Undertaker. I mean, I don't believe most people want to see him in a match, but I think that if the gong went off, people would pop like crazy. I mean, it still happens for Austin, still happens for Rock. And whenever they come back, it's just that's the case. I mean, but yeah, Brock Lesnar, it's going to be the case. You're right, where people aren't going to realize what they have until it's gone. And realize the totality of his body of work, which is just enormous. I mean, whenever they do like a documentary on Brock Lesnar, they should be doing one right now, by the way, just like, paying whatever he wants to pay so he doesn't, knock out the cameraman to follow him around, and just document his life, document his organic interaction with fans, like just get those side comments and interviews that the Undertaker did. Like I would take Undertaker's formatted documentary of The Last Ride and just like plop that into Brock Lesnar's life and see what comes of it. I think you could make a really engaging and just enthralling documentary on Brock Lesnar, kind of an introspective on him. I don't know if that's being done, but they'd be foolish not to, because I don't think Brock Lesnar has a whole lot of time left. Not that he's injury prone or anything, but he's aging. He doesn't really need the money, and he's there because he likes money, and he is maybe doesn't have much else going on outside of slaughtering a moose and calling the moose Pierce or whatever he's doing. I don't think there's a whole lot that right now anyway, and from the public eye, that he's doing. So yeah, it's going to be a case of we didn't know really what we had until it's gone, and they do a documentary and people are like, damn, he was awesome.
Yeah, and I do think when all is said and done, people will look back more fondly on him. And like I said, I do fully agree that the original Brock Lesnar gimmick, that character, is much superior to the one that we're seeing now. But in some way, I am happy to see him showing a different side of himself and prove to people like, hey, if I really wanted to, I could do more than just be super jacked and make mean faces, if you know what I mean.
That's true. Yeah, no, exactly. I'm not ranting. I'm not hating on it. To me, it's just not my flavor of Brock Lesnar. I know that it's the same flavor that I'm going to get, but I like it and I'm good with it. And I'm like one of those guys that I go to a restaurant, I know what I want to order. I'm not, when people try to convince me to order something different, I'm like, nope, I know what I like and I know what I want. And I know for sure I like this. So I'm not going to go with something I'm going to hate and then get pissed off and have to send it back. So let me just get what I want, and that's the same thing with Brock Lesnar. Like, to me, I didn't think it needed a change. Maybe outside of, okay, if he's a babyface, he doesn't have a mouthpiece, let him speak a little more, and we're seeing that. But to me, yeah, it did go a little bit too far into like kind of the weird territory for Brock, where it didn't really click on maybe the level they hoped or thought it would. But maybe Paul Heyman will reel him back into reality and take off the butcher's apron and just get back to being, Brock freaking Lesnar. So.
Yeah, I think the butcher's apron was a little too much. That's one thing that when I saw him come out, I was just like, that's not the best look for you, man.
No, it's not. I know what they were going for, but I was like, yeah, that's enough. Can we scale it back? Yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate what they're doing. I appreciate them trying something different, but to your point, I think that after a certain point, they're just going to have to get back to what we all know and love and what ultimately works the best, and that's classic Brock Lesnar in the tracksuit, the cutoff tee, the whole 9 yards.
And somebody, I will pay. There's a ransom on Brock Lesnar's hair. I will, I will put a bounty out on Brock Lesnar's hair if they want to sneak into his home, risk their lives with a pair of clippers. So.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
I mean, I know a lot of people love it. I just don't. So.
I don't love it. I don't hate it. Like I said, I respect what they're trying to do, but I'm not going to sit here and say that I rather this than the classic Brock. So I am right there with you. But again, I do respect what they were trying to go for.
Oh yeah, no, exactly. I'm not bashing WWE. I'm not bashing Brock. I'm not bashing anybody that made this decision to try to show us a different side, a completely different side, and make his look different and make his promos. And he's trying to be a little bit more of a funny guy. Cool. Like, and especially this part of his career. Why not? He's got nothing to lose. He's not the future of the company. He's playing completely with house money. He can do whatever he wants and be whatever he wants. He's already a made man. There is zero risk to Brock Lesnar doing anything at this point and to tarnish his career. I mean, outside of just something catastrophic, there's nothing he could do in the normal world anyway. So I think this is fine. Like if they don't want to get rid of this and they just continue down this path, it's not the hill I'm going to die on. Because ultimately when he gets in the ring, he's still that same beast of a guy.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, when all is said and done, he's, scratching the surface on a Mount Rushmore of yours. So this isn't you ranty at all. It's just a personal preference. And to be perfectly honest, one I actually share with you.
Yeah, no, exactly. This is all personal preference, of course, but I do prefer 100% the Brock Lesnar that comes out. And if he just wants to make mean faces, make mean faces, because nobody makes a better mean face than Brock Lesnar. I gotta say, he has a PhD in that at this point. After many years of just standing next to Paul Heyman and bouncing around and flexing and making faces, there's nobody better. So, yeah. So anyway, this has been great. I never thought I'd have a whole show dedicated to the change in the small, well, not small change, but just kind of the tweak of the character of Brock Lesnar that we've seen, and wondering if it's something that may reverse itself, and if it's something that ultimately will hurt his career or not. And I don't think it will. But any closing thoughts?
No, just like I texted you today, Brock Lesnar's bleeping awesome, and I hope that most people share that feeling. That's all I really got to say on it.
Yeah, that's the best way to end this, right? Like, Brock Lesnar is effing awesome, and he is. And the best thing that like you said earlier in the show, the number one thing about Brock, the one thing you cannot argue with, is his authenticity, and that's really what has got him through a lot of the things that he did that maybe didn't work, and like right now, the things that maybe fans aren't connecting with. The authenticity with Brock Lesnar it exceeds anybody else on the roster. You can immediately feel that he is not playing a character. He's not playing a wrestling character. He's just himself, which as human beings, we all can sense that. That's why when something's not really true and you don't see it as real, and it's kind of a mask of something, we all sense it. It's just built into us as human beings. And Brock Lesnar, you don't get any of that. Like, this is just Brock being himself, not giving a damn about anything. And I think a lot of people appreciate that, even if the character we're seeing right now isn't the best version that we'd prefer. So authenticity is the best way to describe Brock Lesnar.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. That's one of the things, like you said, that you look for in wrestling characters, and no one does it better than Brock Lesnar in that regard.
No doubt. So before you go, of course, I'll let you share your social media, but don't forget, you can catch Anthony every single Friday doing the Rivalry show. And this past week, I know you covered Mickie James and Trish Stratus. That was a really interesting and fun topic, no doubt.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool to go back and cover that, and I remember watching that very vividly in real time. And like I said on the podcast, I feel as though a lot of people think about that time in women's wrestling as, it was still objectifying them and a heavy emphasis on sexualization. And while that is all true, I really truly believe that Mickie James versus Trish Stratus was one of the trailblazing rivalries in the women's division and the women's, wrestling as a whole. So yeah, go check that out. And as always, you can catch me on Twitter at ADeMarco25.
Very good. Yeah, it was a great listen, I got to say. The one that I forgot about. I forgot about it in terms of, you're right. It was an era that we all looked at it and looked back, and you kind of paint over with one brush of, oh my God, all the women were just sex objects and they were an afterthought and this and that. And while there were cases of that, and unfortunately it was more of it than we'd like, there were examples like this one with Mickie James and Trish and Lita. Trish is I got to say, a pretty big name in a lot of these conversations of at least adding some credibility to the women's division. But Mickie and Trish was, really enjoyable. And got to say, that moment that Mickie James had at WrestleMania, it's been people have been trying to scrub it off of Twitter. WWE has scrubbed it off of their WrestleMania. Was it WrestleMania? Was it WrestleMania 21 that they had? WrestleMania 22? 22. Yeah, and she made a very, very suggestive gesture with her fingers. I'll just leave it at that. I'm sure it's on YouTube if you'd like to go and view what I'm talking about. But that was an interesting program for sure. Kind of the psychopath fan that was obsessed with her, and a really good storyline, no doubt about that. So everybody, thank you so much for listening. Anthony, thank you for joining me. And everybody go check out the Rivalries every Friday. And I will talk to you next week, man.
Yeah, man. Looking forward to it.
Have a good night.
Thanks for listening to the WWE Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a show, or head to WWEpodcast.com. And for all of these shows ad-free, head over to patreon.com/WWE Podcast. Until then, we'll see you next time.